friends, Dr. Khan, Dr. Boyle, if you're in the room, friends. It would be helpful to start from the first slide, so I did that. Isn't it lovely to gather at a learned conference? Industry, various universities, various research organizations. They have annual conferences in which researchers present their findings. But rarely have I seen them start with beautiful devotions of the kind that we did this morning. And that sets us apart. Intimation of the civilization to come. The other comment I wanted to make before I start the substantive remarks is that, as you have noticed, of course, in the Baha'i community, in the Baha'i world, we now rarely and so speaking in front of an audience is a habit that has been forgotten to some extent. So you would take it easy on me, as they say. But I wanted to bring to you the love and the admiration of the Continental Board of Counselors in Americas. I just come board, which was held in Florida last week. And if you wonder, well, what were you doing, a full week, 5 full days, huddled in a room? Why are you not in the field? Why are you not in the trenches? This was our exercise and reflection. 3 full days of that 5 day, the mode of learning that we engaged in was to look at the profiles of various clusters around the continent and to try to learn try to understand what we can learn from the activities that have taken place in the lab. A little bit like a botanist who discovers a new species of a plant and for the first time observes the growth of this plant. And the botanist is not quite sure what branch will shoot next, what color flowers may come out of this new species that have just been discovered. Of something that is organic, that is growing, and we wondered at the beauty, at the rapidity, at the pace at which it is growing. Somebody was saying, if you're growing carrots and you want to see how it's grown. So we have to have different modes and means of observing it. But I wanted to let you know that the sentiment certainly is that of admiration and of love to a particular measure for the North American Baha'i community. This inheritance together, to be the co-heirs to be the spiritual descendants of the Dawnbreakers, essentially. And nothing in this or any of the previous plans has changed that. Let no one mislead us to think. When the organizers of this beautiful conference asked me to say some words here, I thought, since I often speak about the plan, this would be an opportunity to speak both about the plan and our identity as a. So here is the menu for those of you who can read. If you are if you are sitting in a place that you can read, not. One cannot deliver any talk. Unity, the overarching principle that underlies everything that we do. To summarize the list, it will be introduction, the body, and a summary. But we will take a look at really the interplay about our own identity as individuals and as communities and as scholars. Are currently executing. We do have a new vocabulary. That means the language of our discourse has changed to such an extent that it has happened to several people. Or the other, family or work or whatever reason. And we come back and there are new words that we do not know what is its significance. At the one national convention, the friends asked the national speaker, can you please publish a glossary? And this set. I have not seen the Baha'i community at any time so much engaged in discussion, in exploration, in thinking, in asking questions. The question could be framed in different forms. Some are, is this activity still okay? How do I change this particular function in order to integrate it better with the plan? But the more questions we ask, the more we have to think. And the more thinking that goes on, not only among select few, but throughout the community, the more felt growth will come out. The questions are both of a nature that engages the mind and the heart. As we explore new concepts. So the very fact that friends are asking questions should be. And that is really, in a sense, an accomplishment of these series of plans. It forces us to think, to examine, to ask questions, even at the expense that sometimes it leads to tension. Despite that, and we see that not every segment of the community, whether you want to divide that segment by geography or any other criteria, that not every segment is necessarily at the same stage. After all, we even refer to our clusters of Baha'i community. And that is a feature that also indicates a healthy, positive development. It is not that we wish everybody was an A cluster. It is not that we wish that everybody was a graduate of Book 7. That there is a dynamism, that the system always allows with the language of the training institute to the expansion at the base of the pyramid. There is, because we all are learning how to learn. And you have noticed, I am certain in your scholarly endeavors, that words that used to have certain meanings or of the Eastern religions, these words, after has been uttered by the new manifestation, they acquire new meaning. For instance, if you look at the word justice, most people, the proverbial man on the street, justice will have something to do with courts and punitive measures. And that it has something to do with fair-mindedness. It has to do with our vision. It has to do with our mode of operation. It has nothing to do with a segment of professional part of the society that administers justice. So that's one example. There are many other examples where words current environment. Many of you are aware that a new book has been published this year. It is called The Tabernacle of Unity. It is a collection of 5 tablets by Baha'u'llah. In 2006. Which one would you think will be still around 10 years, 50 years, 100 years, 1,000 years, 10,000 years from now? Does that not indicate the significance of that publication? Some extracts of which had been translated previously by the beloved. To a group, 5 different individuals, of Zoroastrians. And so in that sense, it is a subject of study for us to understand the relationship of the manifestation of God with that population. The tenderness with which Baha'u'llah speaks teaches us something. To other passages by the Blessed Beauty. For example, when he speaks of the priesthood in the Kitab-e-Iran, we see that the tone of language is completely different. So the first 2 tablets, let me describe a little bit about that, the facts of it. This gentleman, Manikchi Sahib, Zoroastrian, community, was sent as an emissary to Iran, essentially to protect the Zoroastrians against the Qajars. And he met Baha'u'llah in Baghdad, and both as a result of that meeting and as a result of his witnessing of the sacrifices of the early martyrs of the faith, he became a lifelong admirer of. Did he ever become a Baha'i? Perhaps not. Not in the sense of, certainly there was no administration, there's no registration to apply that test. But also we will question if that test is valid at all. As we learn in the new plan and we move forward, there are Baha'i communities entirely of the manifestation of Baha'u'llah as somebody who is engaged in a process of learning, of his teaching, of his revelation. That's another way of defining who a Baha'i is. Somebody who is engaged in a lifelong learning of the revelation given to us by Baha'u'llah. It's also interesting that he employed Mirza Abul Fazail. His first name, Abul Faz, means the father of virtue, virtue we can say. And Baha'u'llah called him the father of all virtues. Abul Fazail in plural. From Baha'u'llah, and he asked it to be revealed in pure Persian. Those who speak this language, it is like saying, can you write something in English without using any Latin words in it? Or any words that come from that root? The celebrated passage with which we are all familiar is an extract from that. Of mankind, he perceiveth the disease and prescribeth in his unerring wisdom the remedy. The use of analogy by Baha'u'llah himself when he's trying to convey a difficult concept. We do that often in our conversation. Scientists do that. Let me take an aside and say that I was a student many moons ago in London at Imperial College, and we had a professor in electrical engineering who came one day to the classroom, and he, in those days we had chalk on board. Don't think you've seen those things recently, but he of a river. And we were all surprised because this was a class in electromagnetics, not in fluid dynamics. But he began to describe that and put some parameters in and reinterpreted a few symbols and derived a set of equations which applied to electromagnetism. But he started from fluids. 1,000 years ago, there was another man who spoke in parables. I related that anecdote to show that analogies and anecdotes are illuminating in all spheres of endeavor. Reading it in context will show to us not only the content of the words, but many, many new shades of meaning that can be derived from it by understanding the question that Sahib Mangchi Sahib had, and how Baha'u'llah chose to answer them. And every soul its particular aspiration. Be anxiously concerned with the needs of the age ye live in, and center your deliberations on its exigencies and requirements. Certainly we can read this passage to make reference to progressive revelation. Could also refer to the decade, not necessarily the 1,000 years, the millennium, but the decade in which we live. The circumstances that is contemporarily affecting humankind. And to center your deliberations on its exigencies and requirements brings up the concept to consider all matters at all times. So these are my musings, I agree. But if you permit, we can read. It is to illustrate that each one of us can delve in these writings and read them with different colored lenses, if you like. Among the things in this tablet that Baha'u'llah mentions are these words. He says, "O people, words must be supported by deeds, for deeds are the true test of words. Without the former, the latter can never quench the thirst of the yearning soul." At one level, this is of course understood. Sure, you must do what you say. You must not preach one thing and not and do the opposite. That is understood. But that is only one level of understanding it. See the words of Baha'u'llah, he says, without the former, meaning without, but nor can it unlock the portals of vision. So without doing something, we cannot acquire a vision. By merely sitting in a room, smoke-filled or otherwise, and exploring words alone, just by doing that alone, of course we will discover certain relationships, no doubt. Let us not denigrate that activity. But if we want to unlock the portals of vision before our eyes, then the recommendation from Baha'u'llah is that we engage. That deed itself could be educational. It could be related to welfare. It could be related to all kinds of concerns of humanity. But it is deeds that really open our eyes. It would be impossible for me to enumerate all the concepts in the tablet. This is granted. It was also difficult. I know the Baha'i community has studied the letters of the Universal House of Justice, and we engage in that study since December 27th of 2000. I can tell you the personal anecdote that when I returned back from that historic conference, I thought it would be my duty to try to help the friends understand the letter. So I sat down and tried to summarize the letter, which is 8.5 pages and 32 paragraphs long. And after I was done with my summary, it was so I decided to use the words themselves. So here is another concept that Baha'u'llah addresses in that tablet, the incomparable friend. See how he characterizes himself. The prisoner of Akka. The path to freedom hath been outstretched. Hasten ye thereunto. How many generations of Baha'i scholars do you think it will take to explore the meaning of freedom in the context of this single tablet? The word has been so misused, many people have stopped using it. Oh, sorry. Let's see if I can make sure. get the technology to work properly for us. I apologize. Go to the appropriate. Technology has that, doesn't it? You press the wrong button and you're... Maybe we can start from there and try to work our way down a little bit. Yes, we were talking about freedom. And also these words of Baha'u'llah in that same tablet, say, O ye that have eyes to see. The past is the mirror of the future. But also, is this not a call for reflection? It could be the past 3 months. It does not have to be the past millennium. It's the mirror of the future. And as we examine the things that we have done in light of the... it's like a little bit like a ping pong. You have the things you do and you have the things... And we are bound to to go on some tangent, theoretical line that may not benefit us or anybody else. And if we only do the action without going back to take our bearing in the guidance, then we are likely to wander in the desert. So this concept somewhat differently. The second tablet, let me talk a little bit about that. This tablet from Baha'u'llah was sent to Mangchi Sahib. He received it, he read it. He must have been enchanted by the beauty of the words, because just from the literary point of view, it is really an incomparable tablet. Questions. And he could not understand from the words of Baha'u'llah what happened to his questions. So he complained. This message was transmitted, of course, the amanuenses of Baha'u'llah. And then Baha'u'llah chose to do something that gives us a rare glimpse into his world. He revealed a tablet in the voice of Mirza Aghajan, not his own voice. So he's no longer addressing from the summit of glory. He is writing as though the secretary. And he wrote it not to Mangchi Sahib, but to his secretary, Mirza Abul Faz. So now this is a correspondence between the two secretaries, apparently. And at this level, now Baha'u'llah can take up a new level of discourse. Rather than the broad brush, which he imbued such wisdom and such knowledge that can be explored for thousands of years. Instead of that, he could now climb down to a narrow level and there do a tit for tat. Okay, you asked these questions. Dialogue. It gives us a rare view, as I said, that if somebody asks us a question of the kind that Mangchi Sahib wrote, how far can we broaden the topic? How much? Occasional manners. In any discussion, if somebody asks a specific answer, a question, and you give a specific answer, beyond the dialogue, there is the interplay between the two spirits. The questioner is formulating some. But beyond that, there is a question of submission. There is a question of adherence. There is a question of trust. There is a question, can I take you as my guide? That's the real question. That's the question that the soul is asking. So if we give such a convincing answer that the poor fellow has no room to wiggle, we have attained ascendancy. But have we led the inquirer to the source of his life? That's the question. Baha'u'llah gives us a way to say, if somebody asked this particular question, for example, one of the questions was about progressive revelation. The question was, we see there are multiple religions, and each one have a claim for exclusivity. But then we see, for example, that some religions do not accept adherents into their religion. They're not evangelical. Insidious in that, really try to achieve conversion fairly assertively. Which one is correct? And Baha'u'llah's answer is that the all-knowing physician has his finger on the pulse of mankind. Further, as Baha'u'llah is then he says, however, the answer that I gave you was latent in this passage. Just you fail to see it. So I do not know in my own private study of the writings any pair of tablets that provides such a clear, such a beautiful dialogue from which we can learn how to broaden the base argumentative to principled, and from rational only to spiritual. Inherent in those discussions and in many questions are dichotomies. Is it this way or is it that way? Is to go beyond false dichotomies. Let me take an aside. The universal house of justice, the source of all good, the freed from all error, the last refuge, is not a mere administrative body. Is not merely a governing organization. It is also the educator of mankind. And they fulfill this role tablets of Baha'u'llah, illumined with the interpretations of the Master and of Shaykh Effendi, and translating it in a vocabulary that we can relate to in our postmodern life, and that will help us, the scholars, that we inevitably have to have with the non-Baha'i world. And what merely is our own religious reflection. So, we have seen two documents from that source. The December 27th letter, which gives the content roughly. The 5 years that passed and the 5 years that we are living through, coming. And then this document was followed by the Rizwan message, which gives to us the vision of a century. So that if we are tempted to think that the new plan, new and different, we are immediately corrected in this. They gave us just the 4 months' time to fall into that trap and then corrected us. Yes, the new plan is very different. Because growth requires that we do something today which is different than. But it is also, we have to see the unity, the fundamental connectedness between this plan and our previous activities. These are the words of the Rizwan message of this year. And towards the future, they can look with a confidence that is conferred only on those whose resolve is steeled through experience. Confidence has something to do with faith. The resolve also comes from the thing we see. You know, this is really no different than asking for miracles. That's what the early believers of some early dispensations did. They stood up in front of the manifestation of God and said, "Show me a miracle so that I can submit to you, so that I be assured that what you are telling me is the truth." And only if we could see. It is more difficult to see when you are working in one study circle, one cluster. More difficult to see. But, and that's why we have this system, the system of the institution. Statement in the document called the Institution of the Counselors, in which they say that the Institution of the Counselors, through the operation of the International Teaching Center, has a mechanism, if you like, that will harness the collective learning of the Baha'i community throughout the world and communicate this so that friends in other clusters can also learn from that. More reading. Increasingly, friends are learning to do this. I was in. There was a conference of the local spiritual assemblies who gathered together to study the plan, and they did some studies in the morning. And sure enough, in the afternoon, they all broke up. In the middle of their gathering, they broke up, and there was 150. Of course, home visits, it's something else that you do in your own neighborhood, preferably, because you want to be able to maintain that and continue with that. But just to break the cultural barriers. This was done, and everybody comes and says, "Yes, now I know." Many aha moments. Let me spend subject of scholarship. We know that we talked about every word having a new meaning. Scholarship also has a new meaning in the Baha'i faith. The proverbial man in the street would tell you scholarship is confined to a few learned men who have able pens and who may be called scholar. In fact, the word itself brings to mind thoughts of separation, of exclusivity, of elitism, because these are the words that are associated with scholar in the non-Baha'i world. To us, the Baha'is, scholarship is something that every Baha'i does, just like every Baha'i prays. Our learning, and we learn through prayer, through meditation, through various community activities, and through individual initiative. You know that this plan is principally given to the individual. Principally, the plan is given to the individual. The institutions, if you read the paragraph, is to support, to encourage. The institutions are the cheerleaders. All individuals, the singular person to whom one full paragraph is dedicated, paragraph 8 of December 27th, is the tutor. The tutor. I would not be surprised if that individual emerges as, and of course, one day everybody could be, or a large number of people could be tutors, but that person emerges as the as we say, the tip of the arrow of learning. But let me go back to the roots of scholarship and the words of Baha'u'llah in the Kitab Aghdasi. I thought we first look very rapidly and briefly at the context. Paragraph 160 of the Kitab, where he begins by saying, promote ye the development of the cities. So he is obviously intent to speak about civilization. And then he establishes the premise on which we will build this new civilization by giving us, in paragraph 161, let me take an aside. In mathematics, we know that it is possible to develop a complete mathematical discipline, a complete set of theorems that are self-consistent and coherent. And there are more of these, more than one is possible. Geometry and so forth. They are logical, consistent, coherent, self-closed, if you wish. But they are different from each other, because the assumptions on which they were built were different. In Euclidean geometry, we start with a triangle and we say, if the sum of the three angles adds up to 180 degrees, all mathematics. If you assume that the sum of these three angles is somewhat more than 180 degrees, you're not wrong. It just means that you are not sitting on a flat piece of paper, you are on a curvature. And on that curvature, this happens. The angles don't add up to 180. And you have an entirely new mathematics. There is no... I use that analogy to show that if we start with materialistic assumptions, we will have a materialistic science that gives rise to a materialistic civilization, and from within its own parameters, it is undefeatable. Doesn't mean it's wrong. You cannot defeat it. If you start with spiritual assumptions, you will develop a spiritual civilization which is equally undefeatable. There is one way that we can tell which one of those two is correct, because one leads to a divine civilization and the other leads to falls apart, because there is no correspondence between the theory and the reality. Just like, how do we know the physical world is Euclidean or Minkowskian? Is to see if there's a correspondence. So Baha'u'llah begins by the assumption, he shall not be asked principle, endowed with the most perfect constancy. He addresses the divines, the learned, if you like, the scholars. And of them he says that with their own eyes will they behold God. If I may be allowed to interject, if they adhere to the premises that was just established. And then the beauty is the second phrase. Another measure given to us by Baha'u'llah, another principle, measure not the book of God with your selfish desires. Then he gives the example to show how this great learned man rejected the claims of the Bab, yet education may not be correlated necessarily with receptivity or courage or inventiveness or being able to undergo paradigm shift. Superstitions and idols to tremble, and calls on the divines to tear the veils asunder in such wise that the inmates of the kingdom will hear them being rent. What a beautiful statement. What a beautiful statement. And then this is the paragraph in from the hands of the loving kindness of the Lord his God the merciful, to pulsate, even as a throbbing artery in the body of mankind, that through him may be quickened the world and every crumbling bone. That is our mission. You want to adopt the mission statement? But quite clearly, in the conception of Baha'u'llah, the scholar, as we said, is not an exclusive. The person is not elitist, and the activity is not exclusive. But it applies to all of us. And this plan, by the current 5-year plan, is to make sure we cannot create a class of Baha'i presenters, charismatic speakers, which would in effect replace the divines. Through the activities that we refer to as the core activities, the 4 core activities, through the operation of that instrument, each one of us becomes a scholar by reading, delving, meditating, doing, reflecting. Welcome change. In fact, change should be, you can't beat them, might as well join them. Change should be planned in our life. Disruption is good. Of course, discipline, yes. Don't go coat and so on and so said disruption is good. We're quite happy coming together in our centralized children classes, wonderfully, and getting involved with our Baha'i communities in our deepenings and so on. The House of Justice is essentially sending us pioneering into our non-Baha'i neighborhoods. And the same spirit of heroism as we value process and engage in selfless service. And there's a tablet from Baha'u'llah, I have not quoted it here, that talks about rank and unity. That yes, we do have rank in the cause. But the beauty of this cause is that those who occupy ranks do not of its existence. They do not seek rank, nor do they glory in it, so we should not wear the mantle of our scholarship. Check that out at the door as we go to our activities. And it is that sense of humility that really helps us foster creativity. Ourselves together with everybody else in the community aspirations. 5 minutes? Good, thank you. I'll have to go a little bit faster on some of this material. A new state of mind. Awareness of the value of the process. The necessity of the planning and the virtue of systematic action. Really, I could take any one of these phrases and we can explore at great depth these aspects. The characteristic of the new culture is that we are not consumers of this religion. That's the new culture. These have, in their comfort, become consumers of the faith. This plan disrupts it and generates new dynamics, much more positive, much more elevating. What the Baha'i community currently faces we have done our training institute books, and we have tried to do the practices, and sheepishly we did go and visit a Baha'i in his home until we learn how this thing works. It really has to do with courage. And I couldn't offer a better statement than Baha'u'llah's own. For the faint of heart. This is an arena of insight and detachment, of vision and upliftment, where none may spare on their chargers save the valiant horsemen of the merciful. We are the cavalry among the host. Service is another word that has been redefined. Used to be in the context of committees and institutions. Now, service in the Baha'i community means studying the faith together with some non-Baha'is, or praying together with the seekers of truth. or having programs for the junior youth. That is, by the way, the fourth core activity, is something that we started at the beginning of this new plan, and therefore we are not behind anybody. But clusters across North America, one after the other, particularly in those that have been able to quickly get past the dichotomies and engage in the field of action. We see such receptivity. North America, most of the messages have 2 paragraphs. One says if you are expansion phase, then do this, but if you are less. North America is not the second category. Western Europe may be. North America is not, because the people of America believe in God. The tablet about the analogy of the lens and the sunlight. If you allow me, I will move forward. And to be scientific, you see, the beloved Guardian wrote that the faith is scientific in its method. If you find yourself, you cannot find anybody else. But it is okay to be structured. It's not okay to be rigid about that structure. Where exactly the line is something we all need to work through. Then we should ask ourselves, am I scientific? Am I methodical? But I want to mention this. One of the friends was saying, well, you are speaking with the scholars. You have to have a few words that sound scholarly. So here. This is work done by but by essentially people, most of them Christian theologians, who are grappling increasingly find that a fundamentalist interpretation of religion will render them irrelevant. So they are turning to new interpretations. Physical sciences, the hard sciences, and then the more softer ones, life sciences and so on. So physics and chemistry. If you think of a hierarchy of how we know things, above that, life sciences, neurosciences, social sciences, and so forth, then we can say that the softer sciences cannot have a rule or a law that contradicts laws of physics. That's meaning that a hard. But on the other hand, the softer sciences do have some emerging laws that are not reducible to the harder sciences. Meaning this: if you give some money in an act of charity to a poor person, this action cannot be completely describe the physical movement and including what goes on inside your neuro system. So the emergence, meaning that the upper level laws, something emerges. So human action must conform to the laws of physics, but also to the ethics. Okay. If we think of this hierarchy, and then say, it will have to be at the top of the hierarchy because it is the softest of the soft sciences in that sense. Meaning that religion cannot have any teaching that contradicts the known laws of science, but it would have plenty things that science has no access to. Utterances of the divine manifestations at the top level of the epistemological hierarchy ensures both religious conformity to basic sciences and illumination and guidance for such sciences. And I will close by these remarks. That everything we do, including our study of interaction between of a spiritual enterprise. Here is a tablet from Abdul Baha in which he says that God's cause is the spirit unalloyed. Its only army is the love of God, its only joy the clear wine of His knowledge, its only battle the expounding of the truth. And then these words. Self. You know, we have many different kinds of selves in the Baha'i faith, in the writings. The rational self, so on. Here is a reference to the insistent self. I have never met an insistent soul, so I cannot talk about that. But that is the one crusade. That we have overcome all things.